right, so today we are talking on confidence without perfection. Confidence without perfection. And I think both of these terms, confidence and perfection, they almost need to be defined differently or separately, right? Because there's so many different ways that we approach these. And by the way, I'm just going to kind of start and see where I go with it and see what comes through. If you guys have a question or comment, just raise your hand. That way we can bring it into the conversation. Let's look first at this idea of perfection, because a lot of you already voiced from the very beginning that this is something you might struggle with. A little voice in the background that's like, no, a little bit better, a little bit more. It's not enough. How many of you have had that voice? It's not enough. Ooh. How about, I'm not enough? Worse. I'm going to start off a little counterintuitive today, and I'm going to say something that you would never really hear in conscious communication in circles like in Bali, and it's true. You're not enough. But not because you at 100% isn't enough. If you were 100%, you're enough. The math is there. But the problem is we've divided ourselves, right? We put little fragments and pieces into roles and masks and defenses and walls and all these barriers that we've built up over time, over our lifetime. And then all of a sudden we're standing at the front of like 5 different layers of something, and we're looking back at this one little piece, and maybe it's like 20% of who you are, and you're going, you see, it's not enough. That's like looking at an Instagram account and being like, oh, this person has such an amazing life or a beautiful relationship, or they're always in just beautiful places. It can't be that there's anything else happening there. We know this, and yet we still trick ourselves all the time. How many of you compare, right? I think comparison is one of the cruxes of perfectionism, because the only reason you're even thinking it's not enough is because you're looking somewhere else and going, wait, they're doing it better or more or differently or in a way that I think I should be, and all of a sudden you're not enough. But you have no idea what's behind that expression for them. And so this is the idea first, is to realize that perfection doesn't exist. It's an always ever growing, ever moving towards progress of something. But we think of it as perfection because we've compared it against some ideal. Anybody here ever tried to chase a rainbow? And you're laughing because you're like, you can't. Damn thing just keeps moving. Because it's an illusion, right? The rainbow doesn't exist. What does exist is a reflection of something. And that's the same thing with comparison and perfectionism. We're reflecting some ideal in our own minds, some projection from our history and our past, and we're going, oh, I wish it could have been or will be like this. And then we keep moving towards it. And it's not a problem to move towards perfection. That's great. You can move towards the progress of a more ideal version of something. The problem is when you actually think happiness, fulfillment, your completion of sense of self is not going to be there until you get there. Does that make sense? In other words, you're hoping that you'll get to the pot of gold at the end of that rainbow, and until you do, you think that you don't have enough. When it should be a bonus, an extra to something. That every single moment is just something that's being added to the perfection of this moment. Not because it is perfect, but because it is. That makes sense? Not because it is perfect, but because it is. Not that it's perfect, this is a tongue twister. But it is what is. Therefore, you have to just recognize and accept that. Because you can fight it as much as you want, and all that's doing is causing you suffering instead of you taking a step of further progress. I think we get stuck a lot of times not making that step because we're going, yeah, but this step isn't perfect yet. Yeah, but it's not going to be if you're still standing on it. You have to do something. You have to move. You have to take action and cultivate and create and develop. And I think it's really just a choice point. It's a choice of surrendering, allowing the moment to dictate how it presents itself, but you get to choose how you show up in it. I'll give you an example. How many of you have tried the ecstatic dance here? Anybody? Cool, some of you. The rest of you are like, I don't know about that. Those guys are crazy. When you go to ecstatic dance, if you've never been before, this is what I normally see with newbies in there, right? They go in there, and at first they walk into the dance floor, and they're like, what is happening here? People are just dancing like crazy with no regard for, how they look. They're not being perfect. And what people will do is they'll kind of go over towards the walls or the sidelines, and they'll do this. Little bit of bob, a little sway. They're feeling the music. And then you would think that what would happen is that over the hour and a half or so of the dance, that they just slowly, progressively move towards like full freedom. It's not what happens. Normally what happens is there's a moment. There's a moment of surrender, and they go from this, and then you like turn around if you were watching them, and you turn back and they're like going crazy because they just decided, they're like, screw it. I don't need to be perfect. They let go. They surrender. And what I love is that's actually one of those moments where comparison can be an aid, a support to you, because instead of comparing against, you're looking and being inspired by. I'm going to say that again. Instead of comparing against, which creates judgment towards yourself, you're looking at and being inspired by the possibility. And then you can move towards that. And I think that's what happens at dance. People look around, they're like, these people are having fun. I'm over here like feeling so tense, and I'm just going to do it. So maybe we can already start to move past this idea of perfectionism by simply taking the courage to boldly say, I'm going to let myself go. I'm going to give myself permission. This is key. Whenever I work with coaching clients and I ask them, have you given yourself permission? And they look at me weird, like, why would I need to give myself permission? I say, well, check. Have you? Because majority of us have not. We've not given ourselves permission to have the things that we want. We've come up with some story, some excuse as to why we can't. Most of the time it's because, but I'm not enough, or I don't have enough, I haven't done enough, I'm not old enough, I haven't been educated enough, I haven't struggled enough. And until I do, when I finally have paid my dues, then maybe I can have what I want. Very interesting. This is a core question I ask people all the time, and it's so simple, but it stumps them every time. What do you want? What do you want? Sounds simple, and it should be. But normally people will respond, they'll be like, well, I don't know, I don't want to suffer anymore. And I don't want pain or heartbreak, and I don't want to be lonely, and I don't want to be poor, and I don't want to be sick. And I go, whoa, there's all the things you don't want. That's what you're avoiding in life. What do you want? You see, when we're focused on what we're avoiding, when we're focused on what we don't want, then we're going to focus on all the flaws, all the places that we think we are not enough, where we're lacking, instead of going, wait, if I just knew where I was headed, if I knew what I wanted in life, I could start building towards it. I could start to move in that direction, and it doesn't matter if I have it now, because I'm moving towards it. And so it's this shift of focus. Instead of thinking of what you don't want, what do you want? And this is why permission is so important in that, because I think what happens is people will sit there and they go, okay, what do I want? What do I want? I don't know. I don't know what I want. But that's not true. I think we all know what we want. Otherwise, you wouldn't be disappointed when you don't get it. What we may not know is we have permission to have it. And that permission isn't going to come from any outside influence, from any achievement, any goal. The permission is going to be because you choose it. Because you simply decide, yes, I am enough, I'm worthy enough, I want this enough, that I'll take a step towards it. And that step might be simply admitting to yourself that you want it. It doesn't have to be big. Just admit to yourself that you might want something that you don't currently have. And notice I'm saying admit, not judge yourself for it. Again, we look at this perfectionist mindset and it's like, I don't have that. Why don't I have that? Oh, I'm so bad. I don't have that. Instead of going, oh, I want that. How can I have that? How can I move towards that? What can I do to create that possibility in my life? So we start to look at what perfection is. Let's look a little bit at confidence. Confidence is a very interesting word. If you look at the Latin background, confiare, it's like to trust. But not just to trust in whatever, but it's actually to trust in the results of action. To trust in the results of action. That's kind of my own definition. To trust in the results of action. You see, you cannot build confidence or have confidence if you're sitting at the sidelines waiting for everything to be perfect. If you're sitting there waiting for it to all come together exactly as you think it should, and then you're like, okay, now I can go because I'm certain of the path, that's different than confidence. Certainty is about security. Confidence is about courage. I'm going to say that again. Certainty is about security. Confidence is about courage. And the funny thing about certainty and security, it's also an illusion. Because we cannot guarantee what happens tomorrow or in the next minute or moment. But what we can do is create patterns in our lives that helps create a consistency of something. If you're trying to be certain, like, okay, tomorrow, for sure, I'm going to go and I'm going to do that yoga class I've been waiting to do. And then you're like, okay, and you come, and then the class is canceled. You may not have known that was going to happen. And so we can't really be certain of anything. But what we can do is have the courage to step towards it to find out. And that's where confidence comes in. Confidence is to have the courage to take the risk of not getting it right, of not doing enough, of not even being enough. That's confidence. But most of us are waiting to know that we're perfect, to know that we have it all set up, that the plan is exactly in the way that it should be. That's not confidence. There's no risk. And then there's also no growth. It's one of the beauties of confidence is that it grows with you as you grow with it. With every step that you take into new clarity of something. Because if you were, let's say you're at the foothill of the mountain and you're looking up at that summit that we all want to get to by the end of this talk, and you're looking up there and you're down here and you're trying to figure out, how am I going to get up there? And the fear is you're thinking, I have to do it in one step, one perfect, amazing yoga-like stretch to get all the way to the top. Or you could go, I'm going to take one step in this direction. Oh, look, I didn't see that little path there. Now I can walk on this path. Couldn't see it from over there. When we take at least one step with a little bit of confidence, meaning you take a risk of not knowing all of what might be in that next step. You take a risk of not knowing all the steps that are going to be there. But you know at least the one right in front of you. And with courage, you can step onto it. And then you do the next, and then the next. And with each one, you're gaining more and more clarity. And we go again with this idea of the mountain. As you're going higher, you're getting more perspective. That perspective gives you even more confidence because you start to put the patterns together. And now you have consistency and momentum. But that cannot happen unless you take the first step. And that takes confidence. So we're talking about this idea of confidence without perfection. And it's almost as if it's a mandate, an obligation of it, because you cannot move towards what you really want in life. And by the way, I don't think we really want perfectionism. Why is it that you want to be perfect? What's the real reason? Thank you. So that we'll be liked, so that we'll belong, so that we'll be accepted and not judged more than we maybe are judging ourselves. Right? I think that's why we're trying to be perfect. We're trying to prove something. We're trying to prove something. This is a really interesting thing within our society that we're constantly trying to prove. And I like to think that if you're in any situation where you're feeling the stress and anxiety of having to prove yourself, you're most likely not in the right environment. It may not be the thing that's aligned with you. Right? Some people, let's say, for instance, in corporate industry, they thrive because it's aligned. That's where they're at. They're going great. Other people are suffering because they're like, I'm constantly having to prove this and prove that and make sure that they don't fire me because of this and don't fire me because of that. This means you're constantly under a stress of trying to be perfect in a world that's not even aligned with who you are. Then you come out to Bali, Indonesia, you go to an ecstatic dance or a heart talk, you're like, oh, my people. And you find that alignment, you start going, oh. And how do you know it's aligned? Because you're at peace. You're at ease. The stress and anxiety starts to go. In my line of work, I do a lot of coaching and somatic work with people, and I work mostly with the nervous system. And what I notice is so often the reason that people are having all this stress is because they're trying to prove something. To parents, to partners, to friends, to family, to coworkers, to themselves. And we go back and we look again at how we just defined perfection. We want to be perfect so that we can prove that we're worthy. What if instead of doing that, you simply start gathering together the pieces of yourself that you have been planting all over the place and people-pleasing quite often, because you're like, okay, I put a little bit of me over here, make sure they're happy, and I'm proving myself to them. And I put a little bit over here, and they're happy, I'm proving myself to them. And over here, I'm proving to them. And then all of a sudden, you're over here with 5% of you left, and you're going, oh. Go and start taking those pieces back. If you need to do a shamanic soul retrieval, there's people here. Whatever you need to do, get those pieces back for yourself. And as I said, I work a lot with the nervous system, and my belief is that we get those pieces back by simply finding safety. Because the majority of the reasons we put all those pieces out there is because we felt there was a danger. And that danger, most of the time, if it was around proving or being liked or accepted, is we thought if we weren't, we would be cast out, we would die alone. It always goes back to survival at some fundamental level. So if you can kind of look at yourself and go, you know what? No matter what kind of variety of weird I might be, there's somebody else out there probably the same. I found her. We're together. We're both very weird. And if you can realize that, and the only way that you're going to find the connections and the environments and the circles and the communities that are aligned is if you be yourself. Because as long as you're busy proving yourself to areas and places that aren't who you are, by trying to be perfect there, you're totally missing the perfect match that's over here. This is good for dating also, by the way. Be yourself. Don't go on a date and try to put some facade and mask and look like and be like somebody else. Just be yourself. Because that way it's not a surprise later down the line. I always hear this from couples. A lot of times we do couples counseling with people. And they'll be like, well, at the beginning they were great, but then they changed. Okay, one, we're all changing, so that's going to happen. But most of the time it's not that they changed. They showed themselves. They finally became safe enough that they became vulnerable and showed up as who they really are. They put the masks down, the proving down. Now the hope is that at that moment, you're still connecting. But wouldn't it be better if it was just the case at the beginning? And you might think to yourself, yeah, but that takes a lot of confidence. You have to be really sure of yourself. Yes, without perfection. When you show up in a group or a date or whatever it is that you're doing, maybe it's just that you raised your hand, you want to say something, and you're like, oh, but I'm not really confident about it. Just be yourself. If yourself is that you're nervous and you're certain, great, that's you. It'll be endearing. If yourself is that it's a really emotional thing and you start to cry, amazing, you're going to give other people permission. Because so often the thing that we are so afraid of being authentically as ourselves in expression, there's more people around you that wish they could do the same. And they're just waiting for somebody to break the ice. I like to use this example of permission. I think permission is contagious, right? That once somebody gives permission, then it gives it to the rest. And so imagine you're at a party. There's the party going on, it's a birthday party, and they bring out the cake, and they put it over on the kitchen table. You're over here dancing, you're like, oh, cake, that's good. And so everybody starts dancing over towards the cake, and they go around the cake, and they're just looking at the cake. They're still dancing, they're looking at the cake, they're looking at the knife to cut the cake with, they're looking at each other, cake, knife, at each other. Nobody wants to be the first one to take a slice. Be the one that gives permission. Not just to yourself, but to everybody else. Because I can guarantee the moment one slice is cut, the cake is gone. And you might even think to yourself, just a second, you might even think to yourself, that person had confidence. Yes, they took a risk. And that risk was that others might say something or not agree or not approve, which means you were busy trying to prove yourself. But if you're not trying to prove yourself and you're just showing up as who you are, guess what? Nobody can argue with you on that. There's definitely ways and habits we can create and cultivations we can do to shift our mindset, to bring our focus towards what we want in life and start moving towards it. And also sometimes to, we'll call it fake it till you make it, right? Affirmations and things like that, where even if you're not thinking, oh, I'm a beautiful, amazing being, you say it to yourself until your mind starts to believe it. But here's the thing with that. There's two things that often happen. One, you're focusing on a perfect ideal and you're saying, I'm not that yet. Now we have both the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. The conscious mind is like, yes, I'm an amazing person, I'm going to go there. The unconscious mind is like, yes, we're saying that in order to get there because that's not what we are. And so it's reinforcing the wrong thing. So what we want in order to actually achieve those states is just that. We have to have an emotional state that matches the mental state. We have to feel beautiful. We have to feel confident. We have to feel these things while also reinforcing it to our minds. Right? When we do that, then all of a sudden we are actually being that. Our feeling, the senses of our body, that is the only true expression of who you are. When I say be authentic, that's what I'm talking about. Be what's really the feeling in you at that moment. You could have somebody that's like a top CEO, super achieved and successful and abundant, and they're very, very confident, and then something happens and it breaks them and they feel sadness or grief or despair. In that moment, their authenticity is the despair, not the abundance. Because if they're in this other state and they're pretending to be that still, it's not going to correlate. And there's going to be an issue with that, right? that's also where the imposter syndrome comes in and things like that. Yeah.
I often don't know who I am.
Oh,
who I'm
yeah.
supposed to be. So how do you find yourself?
I love the question just now.
Feeling?
Partly. So there's a couple things. One, the first question or the comment of, I don't know who I am. And so maybe the question is, who am I? But then you asked another question. It was very interesting. You said, who am I supposed to be? Ooh, that's where it gets dangerous. Where does the supposed to come from? Who's mandating or conditioning what that is? And where's the qualification, I guess, right? So if we were to take that out, and we just look at the basic question, who am I? The question needs a little bit extra to it. Who am I right now? Who am I right now? Who am I now? Who am I now? Who am I now? Because in every single moment, who you are and how you're expressing is going to change based on your circumstances, based on your state, based on the thoughts that are going on. And as the gentleman in the back mentioned, you can start to train and condition those thoughts so that you're not focused on things that you conditioned yourself unconsciously with before. No matter what, there's conditioning that happened. You can either do it consciously or unconsciously. For many of us, we went through life being conditioned by the media and outside influences and magazines and all these pictures of perfection. And so then our mind was like, that's perfect, you're not. We have to start to shift that and look instead at, what do I choose is my perfect? And then be that. Right? Allow yourself to be that. I always like to say that there's two things that I like to say, and then I'll come to your question there. The first one is, people will often ask me, well, what's the right choice, though? If I'm trying to choose something, I'm trying to choose who I'm supposed to be and all these things, what's the right choice? The one that you make. That's the right choice for you. Because it's not about making a choice and saying, this was the right one, that was wrong, that's why I left it behind. Because most of the time we do that, and then we're like wondering, going, well, what if? But the thing is, that's already in the past. Therefore, as soon as you took a step with confidence in the progress of something, every other choice went away. You're here now. You have choices in front of you. Now you might make a new choice that leads you in the same way that other one would have, but it's in front of you. So that's why instead of trying to figure out what's the right choice to make here, whatever choice you make, because it's going to move you forward. And you're either going to learn from it or you're going to move closer to what you want. Right? The other thing I like to say is that your truest self is your power to choose. Your truest self, like if we try to define what self means, it's your power to choose. Your power to choose. When you realize that is the core of who you are, and you're asking that question, who am I? You are the power to choose. Are you forcing it or are you allowing it? I like to use the word permission rather than try or I'm doing it this way, or I'm going to stay disciplined to this. Because when we do that, then we're not really listening to our feelings, right? But to permit means that you simply allow the possibility. And so you've come here, and let's say that you're here and you know that there's nobody else who's going to be choosing where you're supposed to go. You have full freedom of choice. You can decide to come to a talk like this or a yoga bar or yoga class or something. And as you're trying to feel it out, if in any part of you, you're in your head going, well, I know I'm supposed to be doing more physical stuff, so I should go to the yoga class. No, you already took away listening to yourself. Which one do you want? Right? And the moment that little whisper comes up in your mind that says, well, yes, I want that, but I can't. Why not? Instead of looking at how you can't, how can you? Just find out how you could have something. And then you prioritize, right? You go, okay, this is what I would like, so I'm going to prioritize that first. And then if there's certain things you have to do out of responsibility and maybe some obligations or expectations, fine, you can still do those. But fill your own cup up first so that you actually have the energy, the joy, the pleasure of life, so that when you go and do these other things that may be asked of you, that you have the energy for it. Now, I mentioned the word discipline a moment ago, and to be honest, actually, discipline has its place. And discipline has its place in being consistent with something. Because to truly develop your confidence, you have to be consistent in doing something. Right? Imagine as a baby, if you started to try to walk and like you get up on both legs and then you fall down, you're like, well, that's never going to happen. Never mind. No, you got to get back up, try again, get back up, try again, get back up, try again, until all of a sudden you make a few more steps and you're like, oh. And you do a little bit more and a little bit more. And in continuing with a discipline of curiosity, that's what I like to call it, With the discipline of curiosity, you get to see your progress grow. And I think this is actually how we develop confidence the most, is by being consistent in something. Do something long enough to get a real clarity about it. I'll give you a real-world example. In kind of a previous life of profession, I used to do Facebook ad management. And when I would do that, the clients would ask me, they say, okay, create the ad and the campaign and put it out there. And I say, okay, we're going to do that, and then I'll check back in with you in a week and then another week as we start to get some results. And almost every single time, the client would call the very next day after the campaign is released, and they're like, it's not working. The ads are too expensive. Like, change this and change that. I'm like, no. We need to stay consistent with this so we get clarity of what's really going on. Yeah, but we're losing money and we're not getting the sales and we're this. Because here's the thing, and I like using this example because imagine that you're on Facebook or any social media or wherever the ads are being placed. Are you the same person on a Monday as you are on a Friday? Or in the middle of the week? Or maybe in the morning as to the evening? No, right? And so if we only launch we'll call it an exploration, a curiosity of things for just a day, you're not getting the full spectrum of possibilities. Therefore, you're not getting all the opportunities that are there for you. You're not getting all the potential. And instead, you only get a little fragment of what's possible. And then you think, well, if that's all that's possible, I don't fit in that. This doesn't work for me. And all of a sudden, you don't have the confidence to go for it. Or you are consistent doing something the same way for a consistent amount of time, a week, a month, a year, and you start to realize things about it. You start to get deeper clarity each time. With that clarity comes more confidence. We're asking the question, who am I or who am I supposed to be? And instead, why aren't we asking, who do I want to be? Who do I want to be? Her example was perfect, that she started to realize who she is by looking at what she wants to do, what she wants to experience, how she wants to feel. And the more she did that, the more she was like, oh, well, yeah, this is who I want to be. And you start to put it together. Because when we ask, who am I or who am I supposed to be, it's almost like we're asking some outside authority, right? We're still kind of being like, who am I? Who's supposed to answer that? Because we are still waiting around. We're like, yeah, but somebody's going to tell me, right? If instead of that, we could start to go and look at who do I want to be, we start to define it for ourselves. And that's what I mean by the power to choose. I'm saying that you're in the right place or that you're in more alignment when you're at ease. Now, and you were mentioning, but what about growth? Like, in order to grow, we have to kind of pass through this uncomfortable zone, this place of the unknown. And this is key. It's when you're ready to grow. Most people aren't trying to grow. They're not trying to move towards something. They're trying to get away from something. Right? And in trying to get away from, that's where they're proving themselves, and they're not at ease, and they're anxious, and they're stressed, because it's like they're afraid it's chasing them. These judgments and these, whatever survival things. Right? Traumas of the past, many different things that in our memories and in our stories, it's chasing us. And so we're not at ease. But what would happen if first you put yourself in a position, in a place, a community, a circle, a situation where you can feel at ease, that you can feel safe? Well, then that's your starting point. That's where you begin from. Now, from there, you can have the confidence, because like I said earlier, confidence does mean you're going to take a risk. And that risk is stepping curiously into the unknown. And that's uncomfortable. So it's not to say that once you get to ease, you just sit back and you're like, whew, made it. Okay, I can just relax. Because the problem about life is that life is moving on. And so every time that you stop, life has gone ahead of you. And now you're behind it again. And you're running. So you do have to continue to move and grow. But you do that from a place of safety, not a place of, I'll call it threat. Because that's normally where we're doing it from. And that's why we're trying to be perfect. When it's from a place of ease, then it's like, imagine you put a leaf in a river, and the river's flowing downstream. The leaf is at ease, and yet it's experiencing a whole bunch of new things because it's surrendered and it's letting life take it along and it's following along with it, right? And it might even choose sometimes the direction and how it rotates and it does things. But when you're going against that, you're looking behind you instead of ahead of you. And so now the leaf has turned around and it's trying to go upstream. That is a struggle. Not at ease anymore. So you can actually still be at ease, but be uncomfortable at the same time, going into the unknown. Yeah, with confidence. That's actually the key is that you move into that discomfort with confidence, knowing that you're moving forward. You know when you're moving out of avoidance and when you're moving out of desire by one simple thing. Are you in a rush? If you're in urgency, if you're in haste, if you're rushing, you're trying to avoid something. When you're moving towards what you want in life, you're at ease. There is no rush. You can be patient with it. You can take your time because there's nothing you're afraid of in this moment. You're just trying to add more joy to your life, more things to your life, right? Or more alignment even. But if you're trying to get away from something or you don't feel enough, you're trying to be perfect, then you're going to be rushing. Because the discomfort's not coming from something new, it's coming from something old. You know, when you do start to align with something new, and maybe it's not how people have known you before. A lot of people, if they've known you many years, they're conditioned to know you in a certain way. That gives them a certain stability and security to know who you are. But then all of a sudden you change. And it's not that they don't like you, they don't like that you changed. What I always like to say, though, is that human nature is one of the most adaptable, species that's out here. We adapt so quickly, but only with consistency. So now imagine that, let's say you've been here in Bali, you had all these massive transformations, and you've become this new, liberated, beautiful, amazing, like you're expressing self. And then you go back home, and everybody's like, what happened to you? Like I remember, I think my wife even made this comment to me that when she first went back home after she'd been traveling around Southeast Asia, her mom was like, did you join a cult? Like, you're different. You're so peaceful. What's wrong here? And so we're going to notice change, and people don't like change if it wasn't asked for, right? But if you go back and you stay consistent as that person, you continue to be like, yeah, this is who I am now. This is who I choose, and I'm enjoying it. And you do that, and for the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, 1 year, trust me, within probably a month, if not less, they've gotten used to you and they like you again. Or they drop off, right? And that is okay, right? You're also going to give permission to a lot of them to go after what they want. And the ones that drop off, it's because they're not ready to look at their own stuff. Right? Or again, it's not aligned. They might just have totally different interests. Yeah. Exactly, and it makes space for the new. So yeah, we get to start to allow ourselves to do this. There was an article I wrote several years ago, and it was around this idea that when we step out of the circle that we've been in, it's almost like you were sitting at a table and you were all eating the same meal, and you were used to that. That was the diet. That was how you did things. And at some point you're like, I want something else to nurture myself, to nourish myself with. And you stand up, and all of a sudden you're like, ooh, I'm the only one standing at the table. That's uncomfortable. I'm going to sit back down. Right? How many of you have done that? You're like, I've changed. Nobody else changed with me. Never mind. And we do that because we get lonely. We get scared. And we go, well, here's what you get to realize. 2 things. Partly what you just said, that you're making space. When you stand up, you notice that other people may not have stood up. Wonderful, that's fine. They now became the people that you might be able to inspire if it's aligned for them. The people who become your tribe are the other tables and the other people standing up at those tables. Right? And now you've made space for them. And that's how you grow. It's never that we're ever going to be alone. As long as we keep our eyes open, we stay curious to the possibilities that are there. And with confidence, we move towards those possibilities and we start to act upon that. But if we get stuck trying to make sure that we've got the perfect plan, you're never going to make the move that gives you the clarity. Sometimes you make a decision or a choice and you move forward and you whatever results are there. What happens though if you're looking back and you have regret or you're wondering, was that the right choice? Maybe I would have had a better life if I'd made a different choice, or if only I had, invested in Apple and, Bitcoin and all that, We look at these things, right? And here's the thing. I don't think we're judging the choice we made then. We're judging our lack of confidence to make the right one now. Do you guys get that? We're not judging the choice we made back then because we can't change it. There's nothing to be done. But we're using that as a distraction to keep not making the right choice or the choice that moves you forward. Because you might be like, why didn't I invest in that back then? I could have really, done well if I had a property or something like that and I wouldn't be struggling with money. Or you could go, I didn't know how to invest back then. Let me start to learn today. Because from this point forward, I can start to change that. Right? So I think that's really what resent is. Or regret, sorry, not resent. Regret is we're looking at it and we're getting upset with ourselves because we're realizing I'm still not making the choice that moves me forward. How can I have the courage to do it? By just taking one step. That's confidence. You know, we're saying move forward, move towards the things that you want in your life, move in a direction of your desire. But there's also the somatic level. There's also the level of impact that has happened in your past life, which creates trauma, right? Trauma is simply an impactful moment that you've carried. But we have to wonder, what are you really carrying? Let's say that 10 years ago I was mugged, and there was a trauma because of that. But the mugging has already happened and passed. It's no longer in my present moment. But what is being carried is the story about it, and the story in my mind that says, I need to be prepared and protected against that happening again. And so whenever these impactful moments happen, we put a little bit of armor on. That's the weight, right? We're carrying this armoring, this protection. And that's why I say that before you can even start to look in the direction of what you want, the very first step, find safety. Bring your nervous system, yourself, emotionally, mentally, and physically to a place of safety. Then you'll have the clarity to move forward. And that's what the somatic work and all these other things, that's first phase. Once you do that and you get to this place of safety, now you can start to look forward mentally and projecting your ideals and start moving forward. Yeah. It's a great question. Oh, good. Oh, good. And I think we probably are out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up. Yeah. We've been talking today about confidence without perfection. And it's the idea to realize that this idea of perfection in the first place is an illusion. It is the chasing of a rainbow, hoping for the pot of gold, when really the real value is your choice of what you want, not what you think you should be. Right? Not the comparison of judgment, but the comparing into inspiration to give you possibilities and permission to move towards things. And as you do that and you find the courage even to take one step, you don't have to get all the way. That's you again thinking perfection. Instead, just go, let me get one piece of it, and another piece of it, and another piece of it. Like when you're putting a puzzle together, and each puzzle piece, when you connect them in, at first, you have no idea what you're building. You just know that worked, that fit. And then that fit, and then that fit. And as you do that, all of a sudden the clarity comes forward of what the big picture is. Don't worry about the perfection of the picture yet. You haven't gotten that far in the path. Just right now, start with the two pieces and make sure they fit. Thank you, everybody.